Yeah. So we are live now, sir. Hello, friends and students. Welcome to the webinar with Dr. S.S. Mantha. We've been having some wonderful webinars in the past few days, and I just thought that while we're talking of counseling, this should be something where we actually take up the grievances of students, because one is you ask questions of what to do and how to go about it, but two is a lot many students, because you're into the admission season, would be facing or getting would be confronted with a set of issues that I think you should know in terms of your rights and in terms of the obligations of the institution. And I was looking at a person who would be able to respond back with great candor. And I couldn't find a better person than Dr. Mantha, because just for your information, Dr. Mantha headed as an acting chairman and as a chairman for about 6 years AICT, which is the All India Council for Technical Education, which is a regulatory body. And I can also say with great respect that many of the regulations or stuff that has come in terms of transparency has happened under Dr. Mantha, and then it's moved on now, right? So for me, this is a session which is very close to my heart, because I know while we deal with institutions and all, that lot many students really agonize, grieve, cry, wail about certain things that are practices that are done by the institutions. And the students don't know who to talk to, where to go, and how to get a redressal of their grievances. So I just felt that there has to be one session, and maybe we'll have a few more sessions, which give you a sliver of information, which will help you, at least stand up for what you deserve, and what are the kind of protection that you have from the law, from the regulation, as far as your education is concerned. So that is where Dr. Mantha comes in. I must also tell you that Dr. Mantha is the chancellor of KL University. He's also adjunct professor at NIIS, which is National Institute of Advanced Studies. So he's been a renowned academician, a very, very able administrator. He's now the chancellor of KL University. And the reason why he's here is because he was also for 6 years the chairman, or the acting chairman of 3 years acting chairman and 3 years as the chairman of All India Council of Technical Education. Welcome, Dr. Mantha. Your opening comments, please.
Yeah, thank you, Maheshwar, and good afternoon to all the students and my friends who are watching this. Grievances, I don't know, is what was introduced. Is not an easy subject to be at any level. People will certainly have several grievances and problem areas that they think are important to their education, or different aspects of education. And I will try and look at the formal positions, and try and be as honest with you as possible. So that's my opening comments, and possibly over this session, whatever ideas come up from both the sides, I would be pleased to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, sir. Sir, before we kick off with the questions with the students, I'll try to take a few questions off a larger set of students, so that that those questions are parked aside. Typically, there is always this conflict between institutions and regulators in terms of one seeking greater freedom and one seeking greater responsibility. The regulators want institutions to be more responsible, and institutions want greater freedom to be more responsible. Where do you see this conflict going? Because these conflicts have been on not just in India but beyond, and it continues to only grow and not come down.
I believe there is no activity in this country which is not regulated. Everything that you do, from simple things like you stop at a traffic signal, if you cross, you have a problem, and things like that. Every single aspect of life is regulated, and education is no different. And as far as this conflict between institutions and regulators is concerned, I don't think one should really look at it as a conflict. It should be more, the regulators today perform the functions of being enablers, being facilitators, and so on. Gone are the days when people, at least from my time, I have seen that the AICTE functioned more as a enabler, more as a facilitator in terms of the kind of computerization that we have created, the automation that we brought in. In fact, every single individual wants to set up an institution or seek any other service from the regulator could do it sitting at his home, and also seek an approval letter sitting at home. He could print his deficiencies at home. He could print his approval letters at home. So therefore, it's more of an enabling kind of mechanism, more facilitating, and so on. But having said that, we at least in this country, everything revolves around numbers. We have huge numbers, and therefore the best kind of regulation would be self-regulation. But then, does it work for everybody from the top to the bottom? So therefore, we have three kinds of institutions. One which is extremely self-motivating, they would probably look at quality as a guiding factor and create every single infrastructural requirements around the quality perspective. And I don't think too much of regulation is there anyway for them. The second group is possibly they have a lot of potential, but they need a little bit of guidance and so on. That's where the larger principles work. Now, there are also a set of institutions, not only technology, in almost every single area, who would probably cut corners or maybe try and be a little, from a business perspective. So therefore, it's very necessary that the rules that are created, in fact, every rule that a regulator creates is a minimal rule. They really don't look at the other end of the spectrum. So therefore, these institutions, which probably look at the whole aspect as education as a kind of a business activity, they need to be told as to where they get off. So that's where the regulator comes in.
So essentially, you're saying that the regulator comes in when education is treated as a business proposition and not a proposition for a better outcome.
Yeah, I mean, that would be possibly the gist of what I said. But having said that, it's also very necessary today that the development of an institution also needs a lot of money, and quality needs a lot of money. So when money is sought to be created in terms of development, in terms of quality initiatives and so on, which most of the other institutions do not do, and probably the regulatory system feels that this is what I show as minimal, and therefore the institutions have to conform to this, and anything that goes beyond this is a business proposition. That's not right. So therefore, there must be a very clear understanding that quality needs money, and it's always subject to debate as to how much money.
Okay. Sir, now is the admission season, as you will, and the most number of claims, the most deceitful claims or wrong claims also are made during this time, where colleges advertise for 100% placements and whatnot, and they make very, very tall claims. What is the role of a regulator in regulating or controlling the truth that comes out of these adverts? Is there some kind of a regulation that's possible?
No, see, we need to really understand the education system in this country. We have central universities which are funded essentially by the central government. We have state universities. We have private institutions. We have, similarly, we have universities in the private sector, in the central government sector, in the state government sector, and so on. Now, what really happens is the UGC, University Grants Commission, also has regulations to curb these kind of practices that you talked about. So we need to really understand this background. In fact, UGC in 2019 May released a regulation which is called redressal of grievances of students. And there are several provisions in that and so on. So a though you, I mean, would it be really correct to call UGC a regulator? It's a grants commission. Yeah. So therefore, in a larger generic space of calling it a regulator, they already have a provision in place, and the provision has several parts to it. In fact, it suggests setting up a college student grievance committee, at the university level, another grievance committee, at the institution level, at the department level. And above all this, they also have an ombudsman. So there are rules, there are systems in place, and if there are grievances, they are addressed through this process. And it could be admissions, it could be related to admissions, it could be related to anything. So my view is the parents and the students should actually go through some of these provisions that are available and be better off.
But is there a single point contact where a student can complain when he thinks that there is some kind of an unfairness meted out to him?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the student takes an admission to, let's say, an institution, the institution must have a college institution level, a college level student redressal grievance committee. So that's the first point of interaction for him.
Okay.
So all these provisions are there.
But sir, like I'm a financial, earlier as an investment banker, you know, if you want to invest 1,000 rupees in a company, there is a SEBI mandated prospectus where not a single lie can ever sneak in, right? And then here we actually have students investing their entire lives and a few lakh rupees into an education institution where they can claim anything that they want. So how is it that we come to a stage where we are protecting 1,000 rupee deposit in a company, but not protecting a few lakhs of rupees and the careers and lives of students in terms of having a prospectus which only tells the truth and nothing but the truth?
See, that's where the concept of business comes in. I mean, do we really want to call education is a fundamental right? Everybody needs to go through the schooling, at least up to a certain, education, and then people progress into further education and so on. So therefore, there are systems to protect the there are certain minimum norms set up. These norms are seen to be followed by the institutions, and if they do not conform to those norms, then there are several provisions which are made where the institution can be questioned. Now that's the job done by the regulator. So if you say that there is something like SEBI, I would say here you have something like UGC, something like AICT, and so on. And but one-to-one comparison is extremely not advisable at all.
So this is a
because of the quality of activities that we are doing.
Okay. This is a question from Amit sir. His question is: there are private institutions offering diplomas which are not recognized by AICTE. Is that possible?
No, normally what happens is there are diplomas which are, within the state there are boards of technical education, and normally the diplomas are affiliated to those boards, akin to the degrees institutions affiliated to the university systems. So therefore, diploma. The first step of their approval comes within the state governments, and before the state can issue its approval, it goes to the central regulator, where polytechnic education is a part of AICTE, and therefore once the AICTE gives a go ahead to set up an institution and run certain kind of courses, they need to go to the Board of Technical Education and be a part of that system. and that is how they come into the ambit of the state government. So therefore, it's not correct to say that institutions can give diplomas without anybody's. So
So
that's not correct.
So are you saying that a university which offers a diploma course and doesn't talk of who they've got the diploma approved from is not really legal?
No, universities can also offer diplomas.
That's right.
The University Acts provide for them to give degrees, diplomas, and so on.
Okay.
But within certain state governments, there and the technical education especially, there are boards of technical education set up by different state governments.
Yeah.
So first, the approval to set up a polytechnic, which essentially gives a degree, a diploma, is given by the is approved by the AICTE, and once that is done, their approval goes to the state government, and it operates within the Board of Technical Education, because there are certificates which have to be given, which there are grievances which are there, which have to be addressed, and so on. So therefore, generally, a 2-year diploma or a 3-year diploma, which are people are talking about, they have to have the AICTE approval, and they also have to get into the state domain.
So I'm going to persist with that, which essentially means that a diploma which requires a technical board's accreditation, if it is not there, then it's a question mark on that.
There is a question mark, yes.
Okay. So that's good. This is a question that I wanted to ask you a long time back, sir. We've never met when you were at AICTE and I was in my earlier avatar, rather the same avatar that I am now. And this is meant for people who are taking up student issues with the government, with the regulatory bodies, maybe in courts also, right? When we were fighting the case against IIPM, which is the one which has got closed, you were the chairman of AICTE, right? How did you perceive people like us who were on the other side and were impleading you to be a part of the court process to answer us of why certain things are happening? And what was the thinking within the regulatory bodies, within the legal advisors that you have of how they must deal with it? Because in a certain sense, principally, we both were on the same side, but in the courtroom, we are actually opposite each other.
No, within the court, see, there are several respondents in a case.
Right. Yeah.
And the respondents can have similar, some of the respondents can have similar views. Having said that, in a society, you have different players, and the perspective of each player could be different, but the end goal could be similar. Whereas AICTE looks at who runs an unapproved course or who is running an unapproved institution, and so on, and has to take cognizance of that within the provisions that are available at that time. There are other players who are also on it, but their means will be different. Their end is the same. So therefore, being in AICTE, I tend to look at certain respondents who are like you said, on the opposite sides. I tend to look at them as meeting the same ends. So therefore, it doesn't really affect the regulator at all at that time. The regulator is on to his position of proving that a certain institution is flouting the rules or otherwise. And others can have similar views, but their approach could be different.
But if you were to remove the hat of a bureaucrat at that point, how did you look at people like us?
No, I mean, you have a very important role. I mean, if the people, it's something like what the media does. It's not that everything comes to the government through its sources. There are several things that come from other sources. So therefore, there must be a very synergetic approach to problems that ail the society between different players who bring it on the table. So that's how I look at it.
Sir, you also championed the cause of greater transparency amongst institutions. I remember the mandatory disclosure was started during your time, and now the current AICTE chairman has extended that by also ensuring that even placement data is placed there. So the platform where you created a lot of data to be dumped there, which people like us can access, is really becoming very useful for even the student, because we're creating information packs from there. But quite a few institutions still do not put it up. Like, there is a mandatory disclosure that is supposed to be on your website, but it's not there. There is supposed to be a placement data that's parked with AICTE, but it's not there. How does a student or someone like us, force institutions to actually do that?
No, there are established mechanisms within the regulators. For example, any grievance such as what you described, it is when it comes to the notice of AICTE, not only through your process, there are other ways of doing it within the regulators, which is within the regulators' purview. Now, there is a section within AICTE which also looks at the advertisements that are given in papers, or the third-party complaints that come in, or any we don't really look at the source of that, except to the extent that it's genuine or a fake complaint. To that extent, we make sure that it is genuine. Now, having done all that, there is a very set procedure. So people like you could always go back to the regulator and say that, so you give a list of the institutions which are flouting the norms, and the regulators have very set procedures which are time tested over a period of time. And they will check all that out. And there are also mechanisms to penalize these institutions to fall in line. So therefore, they can always, send an inspection team and find out where the rules are being flouted. And if they are really flouted, then action has been taken in the past, as action is being taken even now. So I think everybody has. It's not necessary that you have a backing of an organization to do this. As a simple, as an individual, as a citizen of the country, you find that something is wrong with a certain technical institution, or any institution for that matter, under the purview of AICTE, you can go to them. Under the purview of UGC, you can go to them. You also have a university, which also has a great responsibility, to which these institutions are affiliated, and they can certainly take cognizance of that. Even the autonomous institutions where the examination part is removed from the university system, even those institutions have to report to the university ultimately. And the universities have a task of going back to the UGC. So therefore, all these systems are there in place. Whoever wants to make a genuine complaint can always approach them, and nobody is hostile to anybody in this stage. They look at it properly and take a decision.
Sir, one of the complaints that quite a few students have been writing to us over the past couple of years is that they join a college with a certain promise, but classes are not held on time. Faculties are not there. So you actually have the core faculty not being there and someone else coming and teaching that subject, or asking them to read something online and then go away. So how does a student who's very serious about his studies deal with an institution where either the classes are not held, or the faculty is not the right faculty, and so on and so forth?
First of all, we need to understand that, like water finds its own level, we have a merit system, and students get into institutions to which they are eventually eligible to. So therefore, it's very necessary to see that your entire professional career, or the educational time that you spend in college and is effectively spent, and you do pretty well to get into a decent college and so on. But yes, not everybody can do that, and they end up in institutions probably which are the second tier or third tier in the list, and so on, where these kind of problems may be happening. But like I said, the University Grants Commission has a grievance redressal regulation, which they released in May last year, and primarily there is a college grievance redressal committee. That is the first point of interaction for the student.
And this committee, sir, who does it comprise of? Is it the same college people or someone from outside?
No, there are people, there are college people as well. There are people from outside and so on. So both happen. That is at the college level, and their job is to formulate policies to investigate and review complaints and so on, to create awareness, to tell the students that this is there. You can, with your grievances, you can come to this place, and so on, and to investigate the grievances, and also to provide a redressal mechanism. That's the fundamental job of that. Now, this is as far as a college is concerned. Now, when you move to university, there are again different levels of. We are talking of an institution which is autonomous, and we are also talking of an institution which is affiliated to a university. And there are departments within the university as well, which are part of the university. Now, therefore, there is at the university level, at the lowest level, you have got a department student grievance redressal committee. Now, this is created by the department itself. So, immediate contact would be for the students to go there, make their representation and so on. Now, if they are not satisfied with that process, they can escalate the story and they can go to the university student grievance redressal committee. Now, between this, there is a institution student grievance redressal committee, where if a certain grievance doesn't fall within the purview of either the department or the school or whatever the university has, then they go and approach the institutional committee. Now, let's assume the department committee has not given them a favorable or satisfying answer. Then they can go to the university committee, and there they can make the representation. Now, both the university committee is again appointed by the VC, with VC being the chairman, and there are local people and outsiders as well. Now, once this is done, if the student is still not satisfied with the outcomes, he can still approach the ombudsman, which is actually appointed by the state government.
Okay.
So there are several levels of things. And beyond that, it's again a question of, what is the grievance and how is it addressed and what were the evidences that were given and so on. So it's a process that has to take place.
This is a question from Nitya Patel, sir. Her question is, I took admission in college last year but had to leave it. The college is demanding me full fee for my transfer certificate. What should she do?
See, the point is, no college can demand full fee first. As a principle, it cannot. But if you cancel the admissions, there are rules, refund rules and things like that are there. Under RT 2005, every institution has to put up all the kind of data on the portal, and refund rules also have to be put up on the portal. In fact, the prospectus is not to be charged. In fact, the data that is available within the prospectus is something that is available on the website. Now, as far as refund rules are, they are very straightforward. You get 100% back if you're in 15 days, and 90% back, 80% back, and more than a month you won't get any refund. So therefore, these kind of rules are to be understood by the students. And if some institution says that you pay the entire 3-year fee or 4-year fee, and only then you get a transfer certificate, then they can use this channel of grievance mechanism and get a redressal of that. An institution cannot do that.
But it's interesting you said about putting these refund rules and those kind of rules and regulations on the web portal. Many institutions don't do that, sir. In terms of the hierarchy that you talked of, or even the rules that are there, it is pretty. There is no clarity about it, and they.
No, I don't think every institution does that. Probably there is a small percentage which do not put their data on the website and so
I think the complaints are more about exceptions than rules, isn't it, sir?
See, my views as far as when I was there as the chairman of the AICTE, what we found is about 15%, 15 to 20% of the institutions flout rules, but most of them, they fall in line. And even these 15% of the institutions, when they are penalized, they are either their admissions are stopped for 1 year, 2 years, and so on. They also fall in line. But still, they, in such a large system where you have more than 10,000 institutions and so on, such things can possibly happen. And in the other space, other than technical education, you have 45,000 institutions, so affiliated with some university or the other. So it's very necessary that the role of the regulator becomes enabling, not as policing per se, but as an enabler, and make people see reason to put all this data on the site and so on. Even the Right to Information Act says that, not just the education regulators saying that.
Okay, okay.
So therefore, they are doubly it's doubly necessary that they put all the data on the site.
Okay. So Nitya follows up with this question: should she go to university or complain to UGC? That's the question. Earlier we asked that question.
If she is in technical education, then she will go to first of all her college, then the university. She has to approach the university if it is an affiliated institution or if it is an autonomous institution. And if she is in any course other than technology, architecture, pharmacy, or whatever, then, for example, she is in science, arts, commerce, or then she has to go to UGC.
Okay.
But first, she has to exhaust the provisions that are available within the university.
Okay, okay, fantastic. So essentially, Nitya, you must first exhaust all redressal, grievance that's possible within the university, and if it's still not solved, then you go higher up. You don't go to the UGC directly. This is a question from Jaisimha Reddy, sir, and I've seen this many other places also. Recently, I was in a meeting where they said 100% placement. And when I probed it, then I realized that, unless you get 90% marks and unless you have 90% attendance, you can't even sit for placement. So that way they make the 100 into 40. And then they claim a 100% placement. And even there, when students are not placed, they are made to sign a document which says that I'm opting myself out of the placement because they want to, retain that percentage of placement. What are the redressal that a student has when a institution says, I will not let you be a part of the placement process?
No, see, it all depends on, first of all, nobody can deny any, right to sit for, unless they have certain specified rules. And there are several companies. Which say that we need only students of a certain quality, a certain caliber, and so on. So the whole system works on that basis. So if some student doesn't fit into the kind of requirement of the company that comes in, then obviously he cannot claim that the institution is preventing him from doing it. So these are all things which are put on the notice board. They are told upfront, and most of the institutions, they do that. Coming back to the question of placements and rigging some kind of data on that, we have to really see a lot of a placement is a function of several parameters. We really need to see all those parameters. First of all, find out how many were actually eligible to be placed. See, a student who has a back paper, for example, will not clear the entire semester, then obviously he cannot get into a placement mode. So therefore, for every given institution, we need to really find out these figures. And normally where students have a higher rate of passing and clearing out, which normally means the best of the students, there the placements are also very high. The number of companies which visit the institutions are also pretty large, and that's how the story goes. But if somebody says, I'm not allowing a student to sit for my placement, possibility, and then say, just because my numbers will come down because he is not going to be selected, that is a bad practice. It's not a practice that should be encouraged. And the grievance mechanism is still the same that I had described.
Sir, I get your point that the company's eligibility a student doesn't fit in. I'm not talking of that. As an overall number, most institutions are into setting up structures and regulations which are internal, which essentially brings down the cohort size to less than half of what they have. And then they start going about placing them. That's the first part of it. And then the second part of it is, assuming they're unable to still place a few people, they will make the students sign that, I'm opting myself out of placement before giving the TC.
See, first of all, anything done on coercion, which is against the rule position, is not correct. Now, having said that, the institutions also have to look at quality, and most of the accreditation agencies have placement as a parameter, as a very important parameter. And this is as far as the the environment factors are concerned. Having done that, if you really look at the market, can you tell me that there are enough number of jobs available for the eligible guys I have? So therefore, there is going, whenever you have this mismatch, there is always going to be some filtering mechanism, which will, depending on what the demand is or what the supply is, this factor is only going to vary. So therefore, the institutions will have to cater to only probably the best who come in. Now, in such a situation, the only alternative is to make more companies come into the campus. Maybe everybody gets it, but the price, salary differential will always be there. But you cannot keep on raising the cohort size just because the system, just because the regulator says so. It's not feasible on ground. So, for example, in my time, I had a lot of trouble with finding 100% placement in states like Kerala and so on, where there are in states in the Northeast. So where the industry connect is not very high. So therefore, there has to be some kind of mechanism built in, whereby you make people, make all those eligible to get into the placement positions for companies who come on the campus. And for those who do not come on the campus, there must be some active mechanism within the institution to talk to the institutions, maybe 3-4 institutions coming together, pooling their students and talking to the companies, and then do it. In fact, some of the institutions are also doing that even now.
Yeah. This is a question from Sugandha Bhatnagar, sir. Her question is, can we ask the college for a checked answer sheets during external exams?
Pardon, can you come again?
Can we ask the college for a checked answer sheets during external examinations?
I see every examination in a university has 2 parts. Every coursework has 2 parts. Now, one part is an internal examiner, and the other part is an external examiner's assessment. Papers are also set by one by internal, one by external. They are also assessed, one internal, one external. Now, when the provision for giving the access to the answer sheets are concerned, there is no difference that is made. You get both of them. So there is absolutely no issue on that.
So Shivangi, I think you can, Sugandha, you can get that. It is for you to demand for that. This is a question from Parul Sharma, sir. She's in South Campus of Delhi University. She says that there is no equal opportunity for students for placements within DU, and it is discriminated against based on the college that you study in within DU.
No, I wouldn't look at it as discrimination against some college. The universities, it's like a family where you have 3 children. You can't have one, more favored than the other. All are good. So within the university also, there are affiliated institutions, and the university cannot possibly play favorites on that basis. It generally doesn't happen unless there are other reasons to believe that something like that is happening. Now, having done that, it's only purely one could still argue that some problem may happen within the university system, like what the girl is saying. But would you really believe that that would be substantiated by the companies that come on the campus? They would always, the students have n number of opportunities to approach the companies directly through their portals. And if there is a very specific case of where a certain student of a lower merit is favored because he's of a certain institution affiliated to the university against a student of another institution who probably ranks better, but is looked down upon because there is some friction inside. I don't think these kind of things happen. They don't really happen. If there are specific cases, they can always be cited and as grievances.
Okay. This is a question from Shivansh Kaushik. His question is, where do we complain if universities teachers fail a student just because of ego, misunderstanding, or biases? So this is a question that, sir, I'm not saying that everywhere it happens, but as an exception, there are these misgivings between a student and a teacher, and it starts affecting student lives at times. It might be very, very exceptional, but it does happen. So how does a student who thinks he's being discriminated against, what does he do?
No, first of all, discrimination has to be proved. Just my believing that I am discriminated doesn't help. So therefore, he has to first of all collect a lot of information that is actually being discriminated. Now the point is he gets access to the answer books, and he can get it probably unofficially assessed, looked at by another different professors. And if he still feels that he has been discriminated, he can make a formal complaint to the university or the college which is involved and tell them that there is a problem here and it needs reassessment. Reassessment provisions are there in almost every institution, every university, and so on. And if even after that, if he still has problems, he can, there are any number of grievance mechanisms which are available outside the university system, like the courts and so on. So in the past, students have approached even the courts.
This is a question from Abha, sir. Her question is, sir, I've graduated in 2017 from an engineering college in the RTU, and I didn't collect my degree in that year. Now they're not providing me the original degree. So essentially, she graduated. She did not collect her original degree. She's got a provisional degree. But based on the provisional degree, she's not getting any admission anywhere. And the original college is not giving her the original certificate.
The degree certificate is always given during the convocation. So during that time, she will have to apply in certain year, whichever is convenient to her. She has to make an application, formal application, and the degree certificate will be given. So I don't think that's the provisional certificate is always given to a student. And once the results are declared and the convocation is held, that's the time when the degree certificates are given. And if she has any problem on that, she can always approach the controller of examinations of that university and get that resolved.
So essentially, for people who have not been given original certificates, they might not have collected it, or they might not have
applied also.
Either way, so they might not have applied, nor collected, nor maybe at times the college also denies giving them, refuses to give them. The recourse for them is to approach the controller of examinations. Is that right?
Yes.
And the controller of examinations within the university.
Within the university, if there is no credible answer coming up, they can approach the registrar. They can approach the vice chancellor of the university, and there must be some reason. I mean, if I am given an original degree certificate, and if I have lost that, and I need another original. How many originals do you create? So that's the problem.
There's another question, sir. A lot of students have been talking to us on this, that within the college, once you join in, there are a lot of rules, obviously, that every college sets up so that there is better discipline in the system, right? And somehow all the rules that are set up can be, the only solution is a monetary fine. So how is it that every violation is sorted out by a monetary fine? Is it become a money making thing, or what is it?
No, it doesn't sound logical, but the point is that everybody probably feels that levying a fine, the student is not earning. So therefore, he becomes more responsible if a fine is levied. But that logic will not really work. What should be done is many universities do this as well. The students are given orientation programs. They are told what to do, what not to do, and so on. And they are also told that appropriate penalties will be levied, and that's how the universities function. But then yes, I mean, one cannot possibly levy a fine for everything.
Yeah.
That's not correct.
Sir, again, I come back to the certificates. Now we are in the admission cycle, right?
Yeah.
In the admission cycle, one thing that happens is the student is always eager to get the first admission, right? And to that extent, he ends up paying a fee and possibly depositing the original certificates also.
Yes.
Whereas there is a rule I know of AICTE which says that original certificates have to be inspected and given back to the student. But because the original certificates are lying there, the student is unable to go for a better offer if he were to get a better college. What is your advice to all the students in this admission cycle of how to go about giving their original certificates, taking them back, ensuring that they still exercise their option to get the best offer again?
No, the rule that the original certificates have to be shown, not deposited and taken back by the owner of those certificates, must be implemented. That fact must be known to everybody. Probably the institutions from which these students go, they must educate them at the earlier level. I mean, if somebody says that I need this admission and somebody is asking me my certificates and he submits them, he actually gives those certificates. And see, there is a point here. For example, when you join the first year, that you give the 12th certificate, 12th mark sheet, and it has to be verified, it has to be checked by the local directorate and so on. And that takes a little time. And then the university also makes verifications. But beyond that, I don't think any university, any institution should demand the original certificates except for checking, and they must return them back. They cannot retain the certificates.
So what is the reasonable time? If they say they're checking it for a month, what is the reasonable time of retention of the certificate?
No, once there is a rule that you have to return it back, there is nothing like reasonable time.
Yeah.
So therefore, they have to make an assessment there. If any complaint comes in, assuming that certain certificate is fake or things like that, then there are standard methods available. The college can always get the certificates back and so on. Now that is from the student's perspective. So the student must know that he need not deposit the original certificates, but he has to show them whenever they are demanded. And so that's the point. But having said that, one must also look at the other side of the story, which is also equally important. Now, admissions are happening at different times in this entire window. Now, because of that, students tend to reserve something. I take admission to a certain institution, I reserve that, I still have my certificates, and then I keep jumping and keep on looking for a better institution till the end of the season. Now, what happens when I block so many admissions? And what really happens when I cancel a certain admission? Does the institution, will the institution be in a position to bear that? And if this happens to 20% of the students or 30% of the students, and this natural progression to a better institution actually is making the other institutions not viable at all. So therefore, somewhere a common window must be there for admissions, starting on a certain date, ending on a certain date, and things like that. So if you want uniformity, then the regulations will have to take care. If you want freedom, then these kind of issues will come up. But the grievance mechanism should be able to take care of that.
But essentially what you're saying is the original certificates are supposed to be checked and given back, and they can't be retained.
Yes, yes.
You also talked in this conversation, sir, and this is again a question that comes back to many people as we speak, is that because of the differing admission cycles, you actually have some colleges collecting, admitting students early and starting the semester also, knowing fully well that many colleges wouldn't even have finished the admission cycle, right? And because of which the forfeiture and the redemption of initial fee and all those things kick in. Though they start the semester, they actually don't start the semester. It is all only on paper. So how does a student maneuver around this forfeiture and refund policy at the admission cycle level?
No, there are many institutions. We possibly cannot generalize that. Yeah. There are many institutions, many universities who start off, around first week of July. And if you look at that time frame, there are many state universities where admissions won't have probably even begun. So therefore, it's a case that the student has to. It's a call that the student has to take. So if he would want a certain institution, he is willingly going to that institution, taking an admission, paying a fees there, and fully knowing that classes would start on a certain date. And then he starts looking at other places, looking at the state system to come up, because maybe he feels that the fees is a little lower and things like that. So he has to make a choice for himself. It's not as if he doesn't know that the private university where he takes an admission is going to wait for the the state system to complete its process. So this is a call that the students have to take.
So this is about refundable deposit. There's quite a bit of money that is taken as refundable deposit by universities and colleges. And when the time to come to refund it, some institutions obviously create their own problems. How does the student go about taking care of that?
No, I see all the grievances have the same provisions that I have indicated in the beginning.
Yeah.
Any student grievance, whether it pertains to admissions, it pertains to fees or whatever, or the kind of environment that exists, or it may concern examinations, whatever are his grievances, there is a college grievance committee to which he should go first. If he is not satisfied, he can go to the university. Above the university, he can even go to the ombudsman to get his grievances redressed. But caution money, as earlier it was being called, the deposit that is paid over a period of time that he has spent in the institution, if there are any penalties that the student has to pay back to the institution, minus that, the money has to be returned. So there's the institutions cannot retain that money back unless there is a very valid reason.
Sir, most of the answers that we've got till now essentially put the onus on the student or the parent to seek redressal from the grievance redressal authority or the university with which they are fighting actually. And most of the students who talk to us want to be anonymous because they don't want to take on their institution.
Mm.
Is there a better way of dealing with this? Because you're asking someone who's a victim to actually come out of his victimhood and actually take on the institution, which very few people are likely to do, which is what encourages these institutions.
No, see, ultimately, if I need redressal somewhere at some point of time. I have to make myself, present this situation. But there are agencies outside. There are several people. There's media outside. There are people like you who can, set the system to behave better. And if the student wants to remain anonymous, how long can he sustain that? Can he do that? At some point of time, he will have to reveal that he is the student. If there is a certain fees that has to be refunded back, can it be done anonymously? So therefore, at some point of time, they have to, who will go to court? The fellow who is, wrong will go to court. So therefore, he has to fight. Yeah, I'm not saying that the university doesn't have any role there, any responsibility. The regulators have no responsibility. I'm not saying that. They all have their set rules and regulations. They work within that framework. And if there are complaints made, they make a very honest attempt to, address them.
So this is a question from Ayush Bajaj. His question is about capitation fee or donation. Is there any constitutional act that supports or regulates donation?
First of all, there is nothing like a capitation fee.
Yeah.
There is nothing like donation. So if somebody is doing that, you have every right to make a complaint and get it addressed. So if somebody says that you pay so much money for so and so purpose, it's not legal.
But sir, while we say again it's not legal, a lot of agents, these admissions are routed through the agents where you are actually paying the agent to get a seat in a particular college. So how does one deal with that situation?
Now, when a parent or a student goes to an agent, what makes him think that a agency outside the university purview is going to get him an admission? Why do they go to an agent? Why do they go to these agencies fully knowing that it's not right to do? When someone says that you protect my rights, what are the responsibilities that you have to in order to see that you don't fall in that trap? So therefore, my simple argument is, don't create a problem and then try finding a solution to that. You first of all understand your rights, your duties, your responsibilities, behave within that space, and if something goes wrong, then you make a complaint. That will be genuine, and then you will get a complete redressal of that. Don't make the system chase people whom you have created.
Okay, fair enough. This is a question from Shikha Verma, sir.
Yeah.
A question is, I'm trying to rephrase the question. Does a student have a right to change his college after semester 1 or semester 2 to another college within the same university? And if so, what is the process?
It is a very standard process. First of all, it's not semester. Semester changes are not usually done. It's only after
the semester, after the year.
After the year.
Okay, fair.
Wherever there is a semester system, it's after 2 semesters.
2 semesters, yeah.
So, first of all, there must be a reason as to why he wants to change. It can't be just, I don't like this, therefore I want to go somewhere else. It can't be that. So there must be a very genuine reason. Then he will have to find out to the place where he wants to go. Are there vacancies? There are fixed number of seats in every division that an institution is eligible for. So you can't take people in the second year from some other institution and make your division much larger. So that's not possible. Yeah. So vacancies must be there. Some good enough reason must be there. And then you will have to make an institution to your college where you are currently there. And then you have to inform them, take a no objection certificate, and then go to the other institution. And that's the process. So they look at if it is within the same university, then obviously the curriculum will be the same. And if it is outside the university, then there is an eligibility section which looks into the curriculum and things. Okay. And then they make a decision.
But you
But
can
normally
actually,
this is not encouraged at all. Within the university system, it's not encouraged, because in some way, you will be also violating the merit by doing this.
okay. This is again, I'm trying to rephrase a question from Sunanda Ray, sir. Sunanda Roy. Her question is, she has a health issue and she submitted a medical bill, a medical certificate also to that extent. But the college is still asking for the attendance fine. Is that a possibility?
No, the colleges, if it is an affiliated college, then the universities have very standard rules for medical, absence. So there are rules like at a minimum of 80% attendance is required, and if you have a medical condition with a medical certificate, maybe 60% is attendance is required, and so on. But in no case ever, purely on a medical certificate, without attending any class, you will ever be permitted to go to the next class. You will rather drop that, repeat that, complete, and then move. That's how it works.
This is a question from Yash Mathur, sir. His question is, will my university treat me differently if I complain about them or take any action against them? This is the worry of many students of how the
very subjective kind of
correct. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't normally it shouldn't, because who complains? Only when you have a grievance you complain. Now, if the complaint is genuine, then obviously you should get the redressal. And if the complaint is frivolous, then I believe he also must be punished.
Okay. Fair enough.
Otherwise, these things are never ending.
And sir, if a student wants to discontinue education from a particular college and he just wants to move out, would if the college were to insist that he pays a reminder fee, not just for the semester or the year, but for the full course, what is the redressal that the student has?
Again, first of all, it's not legal. You cannot charge for something you have not done till that point. So once it becomes a grievance, you have a grievance mechanism for addressing that. So you cannot charge all the years fees together.
So, sir, if a student were to just pull back at this point in time, if I understand you correctly, you need to go through the grievance mechanism within the system, within the college, then the university, then the state, and in between there is an ombudsman also somewhere along the line.
The state appoints the ombudsman.
State appoints.
For the university, you have the ombudsman. For the state, there is one ombudsman. In a state, you may have 10 universities. You may state-funded universities. You may have 10. You may have 15. You may have 20. But the state appoints one ombudsman for all the universities.
All the universities. Yeah. And on the other side, you're saying that donation or capitation fee is illegal. Original certificates have to be checked and given back. The student should be able to sit in any placement where he's eligible to sit in placement based on the company guidelines. And so those are the things that we're broadly coming to as far as these are concerned. Is there any other advice that you give to a student, sir, at this point in time to help him navigate this admission process and to navigate or tell him what his rights and obligations are?
My advice would be to look at the websites first.
So I think there seems to be a problem with Dr. Manta's connectivity. So I'll briefly tell you while he's there that essentially what we're saying is that you actually have a grievance redressal mechanism within the college, then the university, then go up to the state. And if you still don't have anything, you obviously have to go to the UGC. Please look at the college websites to understand the rules and regulations. Every college is supposed to mandatorily publish on their website how can you hear me now, sir?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, we lost you now. Now you come back.
Okay. So I'll repeat that probably.
Yes, sir.
See, most of the time what happens is students, they tend to listen to their peers, their friends, and say that I would want to go to the same college because my friend is there, and so on. And later on, they find that it doesn't suit them. They don't have enough facilities and so on. So my advice is to really go and look at the university, gather as much information as possible of that university, what kind of courses they have. Not every institution, every university is good at everything. There are, plus points. There are strengths of an institution. This, all this is possible to be, collated from the websites and so on. So that is something that they have to do a lot of homework. It's not that somebody says you go and join so and so college and he goes and does that. So a lot of information must be collected, and the directorates, they provide a tremendous amount of information these days, the closing percentages, the marks that are required, the kind of placement facilities that are available, all kinds of information is available. But unfortunately what happens is the students, they don't look at all this. They only go by their friends and their, or probably their parents and so on. So that must be avoided. And in future, my advice is please don't depend only on the degree that you possibly would get at the end of 3 years or 4 years of the institution. Gather as much skill in any other area that interests you as much as possible. Maybe you are good at singing, maybe you are good at music, you're good at photography or whatever. Completely go at it with all the passion. Get those skill certifications done, because the days to come, there can be many rainy days, and you really do not know what will come in handy, and also get into the area of the current IT sector, the kind of developments that are taking place, the data analytics part, and things are changing very fast. In the next 4 years, 5 years, or next 4 years, if you take an admission today and pass out 4 years later, I can bet on the scene that the data analytics as we teach today won't be the same as it exists then. And the machine learning part, the AI part, a lot of advances are taking place within the, for a long time I was teaching artificial intelligence,
That's right.
robotics and so on. So there are a lot of changes that are happening. One should get at what is the concept of that, industry 4.0. And when somebody says industry 4.0, it should strike to you that there is something called a labor 4.0. And therefore you should make yourself as, as much as possible to acquire those skills that are required under labor 4.0. And the cognitive abilities will need to be extremely sharp. You need to do multitasking. These are the new things that are no longer it's necessary to assume that I'm good at fluid mechanics of mechanical engineering. Therefore, you may eventually be a very good mechanical engineer, but the options are, coming down. And people should be good at some kind of liberal art programs. They should learn at least one foreign language, which actually is the X factor that can help out. And human resource management. These are the things that will come in very, very handy in times to come. Mind you, I'm not painting any gloomy picture or things like that. Like every evolving society, we are also evolving. It's only that there are certain additional pressures these days in the form of the virus spreading and the education being disturbed and disrupted in some sense. For the people who are there in the college at the current time, I would seek them to, there are n number of freeware available on the net today, on the site, on the internet. And you can always also look at the MHRD sites of SWAYAM, and they have portals, learning management systems. And I believe one should look at all that. Look at third-party content providers like Coursera, Udemy, and so on. All these people, they provide a lot of information that's available in the public domain free of charge today. Wiley gives a lot of e-content today freely available, which otherwise would have costed quite a sum. So there, Springer has almost 400 books, extremely expensive books, which are available free today. How long? I don't know. But you should make use of these facilities that are available for us as long as you can, and for as much as you can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Mantha. I'll just sum up whatever what you've done in 2 minutes. I think your redressal mechanism is first the college, then the university, then the state ombudsman, and then you can go up to UGC or anything else. Please look at or read very carefully the disclosures or the announcements that they make on the website, because it's mandatory for every university/college to make a refund policy disclosed on the website, to make a certain data or information to be disclosed on the website. So don't just go by the prospectus, because what is disclosed on the website in terms of the mandatory disclosures has a larger or greater credence than an ad that is coming out in the newspapers. And still, if you have a problem, please take up the redressal. And I as Career 360, we are more than happy to take up any of these issues if we think that it has a generic, concern or generic. It's become a larger issue, and one has to take care of it. Obviously, we don't have the wherewithal or the bandwidth to take up every individual issue. But if something is very generic and very prevalent in a particular college, which is wrong, we are more than happy. And I will keep seeking you out, Dr. Mantha, because this, as the admission cycle progresses, will become more and more, prominent in terms of how honest, institutions are, and the kind of pain points that students suffer at some level. So thank you so much for being a part of this session, and I hope to see you again within a month or two.
Thank you. It's my pleasure talking to you and talking to all those kids sitting on the other side. And any kind of grievance you have or any question you have or pose, I'll always be more than happy to reply.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.